Angus, let's start with you. Let's put it into context. What is spectrum, and in particular spectrum allocation?
Okay, well, just to start with, I mean, I think as everybody knows, radio frequency spectrum is the thing that you need to communicate between any wireless device, whether that be a mobile phone or any other kind of wireless device, and the base stations and the rest of the network. The focus that's been on spectrum recently has been on commercial uses for particularly 2G and 3G mobile services. There is quite a lot of interest also in the concept of mobile broadband, and I think everybody's heard a lot of the debates around whether this is 4G or not 4G.
Is it 4G, Angus?
The ITU recently actually said that many of the technologies that we talk about today, like WiMAX and some of the more advanced versions of the 3G standards, are actually probably just about qualify as 4G, but it's a big debate. But the point is that you need that spectrum in order to provide either wireless data services or wireless voice services. And we've actually been in a bit of a standstill for probably 2 to 3 years now, with some of the prime spectrum that is available not being allocated for that
So we've
use.
had draft regulations, of course, coming to the fore when it comes to spectrum allocation, and it seems that spectrum has been a rare resource, they say, from around mid-2009, and not much has been done since then.
Well, it's been a scarce resource from day one, since the invention of radio frequency communications, for that matter. But yeah, the problem for South Africa, for example, is that they started this process years ago, trying to, as Angus mentioned, there's some scarce spectrum and spectrum that operators want, specifically 2.6 gigahertz and 3.5 gigahertz. It's a bit technical, but people may know the term WiMAX, for example, and everybody wanted spectrum for WiMAX, but ICASA had dragged its feet for so long that it really, South Africa may have missed the boat in terms of WiMAX, because now LTE is another technology that came in, and they want the same spectrum. So they say, we also want 2.6, and this is why ICASA had to go back to the drawing board to say, listen, the previous way that we saw it was suitable for WiMAX, but now we have to look at a different way that's more suitable for LTE. Otherwise, we may not be able to use that in future. Yeah. So they've really maybe put a dent in the WiMAX, WiMAX technology. And let's hope the same doesn't happen with LTE, that they really should hand it out. They're sitting on spectrum that can make a big difference in the South African communication space.
Tim, could you tell us why it is important that we do see spectrum allocation relatively soon? I mean, we've set the context, we've set what it means for the consumer perhaps, but also what it means for industry.
Look, I think what it means for industry, the market as a whole, if you take the GSMA's latest predictions, which is the body which governs the whole GSM industry and the mobile phone industry, is that within the next 10 to 15 years we expect a tenfold increase in the number of mobile devices out there, and all of those will be devices using data, and really it'll be in your photocopier, your kettle, your fridge, whatever will have a SIM card in it generating data for some other purpose, and that is going to be chewing into spectrum, is going to be chewing into bandwidth, and we need to free up resources right now and manage it a lot better. As Rudolf said earlier, spectrum is a national resource, just as coal in the ground is, and we need to manage it and conserve it properly.
Angus, Rudolf mentioned long-term evolution. Just tell us exactly what that means in terms of the differences.
I think the critical thing is to understand that the generations that they talk about in terms of cell phones. There's been quite a lot of convergence in the industry towards standards. LTE looks like one of those standards that's really going to dominate. Up until recently, there were two very broad camps of 3G. There was the CDMA camp, which Neotel provides services with CDMA 2000, and there was the UMTS camp, which is the European standards, which were typically used by the various mobile players in South Africa. What happens when we move on to LTE is that those really converge, so that there's going to be one dominant 4G standard. WiMAX does still have a place, but WiMAX is not really being considered as a very dominant mobile standard. It's got a niche in various markets. Certainly we use it for fixed access, for fixed broadband access, but in the mobile space, certainly LTE looks like the most likely dominant, let's call it 4G standard. And the important thing is to understand that entire industries ride on this, and in a large proportion, economies ride on this. So turning off the tap on availability of spectrum isn't punishing any particular player, What it's doing is holding back advancement of the technologies for the consumer. And I think that's where the challenge is. So ICASA needs to bite the bullet, and they need to issue spectrum. And they need to issue that not just to people who can take that spectrum and hang on to it. I mean, there's the well-known case of Centec having hung on to spectrum for a long time. But they need to provide it to companies that have the wherewithal to build out. So, you know, as Neotel, we sit in some spectrum where we use CDMA. We would certainly like to have more access to other spectrum, which would enable us to go to future generations of technology. But everyone across the industry without that spectrum is unable to advance, and therefore we start drifting backwards against the rest of the world.
If we don't get spectrum allocated, that we won't be able to advance.
Correct, yeah.
You know, a short while ago, Tech Central reported that there's going to be an auction for spectrum in the 2.6 gigahertz and 3.5 gigahertz bands. They're talking about appointment of a specialist auctioneer, and they're talking perhaps about sourcing them internationally. Your views on that?
Well, I'm surprised that they have to source them at all. Isn't that ICASA's job to just auction spectrum? It's not as if it's not a second-hand car or a house, is it? It's not like you get a normal auctioneer to auction spectrum. It's basically illegal in South Africa. I'm sure somebody may do it in small towns, but not really on a national level. So yes, the spectrum auction will take place, but what we haven't heard from ICASA is what they want to achieve with it. Do they want to use the spectrum to increase competition in the market? Do they want to use it to make as much money as possible for government? Or do they want to give it to players with the ability to roll out national networks? Now, these three will have different ways and strategies of dishing out the spectrum and of auctioning it. ICASA has not said what they want to do, and this unfortunately may cause a mess later on. As Angus rightly pointed out, to use the spectrum efficiently and roll out a national network costs billions of rands. It's very difficult and very time consuming, so obvious choices there will be your mobile operators. But as I said, if the aim is to increase competition, obviously you're not going to give it to those guys. So ICASA really has to tell us what is the aim and how you're going to achieve it.
Exactly, because it's all about the bidders at the end of the day, Angus. So
I don't necessarily agree on the auction. I think the economics of auctions are sufficiently complex. Firstly, we don't think they should have an auction. We really don't think they should have an auction. The problem with an auction is that no matter what you do, somebody is going to end up paying a price which outbids another player, which is ultimately a tax on the end consumer. You know, the price gets paid. There's been some ludicrous prices paid. The most recent being in India, where essentially the 3G spectrum and the broadband wireless spectrum that was auctioned there, the bid prices got to a level where essentially most players could never recover the investment in spectrum. And at that point, you're wasting your time. So we don't think that auctions make a lot of sense. We think there should be a proper, sound evaluation process of business plans, of bids, of the reality of using that. You need competition, you need multiple players, but you need to evaluate those on the basis of their ability to deliver.
Tim, what is your stance on this, you know, an auction of spectrum?
Look, I think it does start pushing up the price beyond, the bounds of reasonableness. Within South Africa, I think the size of the market compared, and then if you take the number of players who can afford to do something with that spectrum, I don't think it's feasible. I think it's a far better process to put it out there, as Angus said. What do you plan to do with this? What will the returns be to the economy as a whole, and then allocate it on that basis.
So definitely playing on dangerous ground if you don't get it right. Your last comments, 2011, we're looking at a local loop unbundling. We mentioned LTE, so there's so many things to look at and to be excited about. Rudolf, let's start with you.
Certainly, it's great news. As I say, I just hope in 2011 we'll see this spectrum being dished out to whoever. Angus wants a big chunk of it, please, Angus, I hope you get it. But dish it out that it won't sit in ICASA's hands because it serves nobody's purpose there. And I really hope the regulations come into place with a good pricing structure that we will see competition in local loop, if not this year, at least next year or the year after that.
Tim.
As an organisation which on-sells services from multiple players, we want to see great products out there which offer good quality and suit the market needs. So if the regulators can assist with that, it'll be great.
Angus.
I think certainly we see this as the year of competition. We're now seeing real competition starting to bite. We're seeing the termination rates coming down, which is going to improve the price of voice services. We're going to see local loop unbundling, we hope, for the end of the year. We also hope to see spectrum.
Should we take a bet on that? Who bets that it's going to happen this year?
It's a 50-50.
I want to see
Okay.
Angus put some green money on that one.
But certainly, I think we see it as a year of competition, and from Neotel's perspective, we're sort of seeing it as a year of efficiency. You know, these things don't just stay at the same sort of level. The whole point of local loop, for example, things need to get more efficient. We all need to get better. We need to get more efficient and more competitive, and that is what drives the improvements for service for customers.
Well, here's to a great year. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Angus Hay from Neotel, Tim Walter from National Mobile, and Rudolph Miller from My Broadband. Thank you so much for joining me today.